The hum of engines, gusts of wind, and the monotonous sound of waves. This was how each day began for the workers on the oil rig in the open sea. Here, at this remote, almost forgotten point where fierce storms often stir the waters restlessly, days blurred into monotony. The workers moved routinely from one task to another, not expecting that today their lives would change forever. Mark, one of the operators, stood on the platform's bridge, monitoring the instrument readings. Suddenly, something strange in the water caught his eye. It moved, but not like an ordinary sea creature. Mark looked closer. It was something gigantic, black and slick, smeared with thick oil on its surface. He stepped forward, trying to get a better look. Standing by the porthole, he froze. It was the sea lion, covered in thick black oil, desperately struggling in the water, as if trying to escape its shackles. Panic was evident in its movements. The animal slid across the waves, unable to pull itself onto the platform. The sea lion fought against something alien and deadly. The thick mass of oil enveloped its body, making its movements even more helpless. Mark quickly dialed his supervisor. He tried to speak calmly, but his voice betrayed his anxiety. "There's something in the water, it looks like a sea lion, stuck in oil. We need to do something." "Are you sure?" the voice on the line asked, filled with bewilderment. "Yes, I'm sure. We can't just watch," Mark desperately replied, his gaze shifting back to the animal. The sea lion kicked the water again, searching for an escape, only to slip back into the abyss. The situation grew increasingly dire. Although the storms were just beginning, the seamen on the platform knew that if they didn't act quickly, distant help wouldn't arrive in time. The phone connection was spotty, and the nearest rescue team was more than 20 nautical miles away. The storm, growing stronger, hindered all communications. The speed and precision of the rescue operation diminished with each passing moment. Mark returned to the operations room and told the same crew that their chances of outside help were rapidly dwindling. The sea was becoming increasingly dangerous, and there was no connection with the shore. The platform was cut off from the world. The shift commander, Richard, listened to the report and looked at all the workers. "What are we going to do?" he asked, shielding his eyes from the storm. "We need to act. We can't leave it." "It's a matter of honor," Mark said, his voice filled with desperation and pain. He no longer knew what was more dangerous, this monstrous storm or the suffering of the creature now hanging by a thread between life and death. Richard looked at the confused gazes of his subordinates and took a deep breath. The words he spoke did not resolve the main issue. Risking one's life to save an animal was a real test for each of them. "All right," Richard finally said, weighing everything. "We can't abandon it. We start the rescue operation, but we will be taking risks. If anyone wants to back out, they can step back. We can't save without full consent." Arguing was pointless. From this decision depended not only the fate of the sea lion but also of many people, and each understood that at this moment, it did not matter who was right or who would win in this battle with nature. What mattered was saving a life. Preparations began. The workers gathered all the necessary equipment for the rescue operation. Someone set up ropes, someone checked the equipment. Mark knew that in such moments, the choice is not always obvious. But there was no time to choose. Suddenly, as if by nature's will, the connection on the platform vanished. Screens went dark, and the silence piercing the space was almost physical. Dark clouds gathered over the platform, and the storm seemed relentless. The wind tore at the tents, the storm swept part of the equipment into the sea, and soon the ground beneath their feet shook from the force of the waves. The weather had become so severe that it was clear everything would change in a matter of minutes. Mike, the shift supervisor, tore his gaze from the screen and, without looking at his colleagues, took the microphone. There was no panic in his voice, but his words sounded stern and resolute. "This is not just a storm, it's a full-blown hurricane. We can't wait for help. We have to act on our own. Saving the animal becomes our priority. Who's ready?" Everyone fell silent. The workers exchanged glances, but there was no doubt. No one wanted to be the one to refuse to act, especially with the stakes so high. And despite the risk, there was a sense that not even the storm could stop them. They began to gather. From the entire crew on the platform, Mike chose 4 workers, each with experience and determination. Among them was senior rescuer James. He was the one who most often took risks, who knew what sea elements were like and how to fight them. His eyes burned with fire, and the others looked at him as a leader. "We're going out, and everything will be fine." The main thing is to stick together, James said, urging the team on. The sea lion was somewhere out there, in the dark waters, hidden under a layer of black oil, desperately trying to surface. The workers felt its restlessness transferring to them. This was not just an animal. It was a symbol of struggle, a symbol of life worth fighting for. The oil platform slapped against the waves, and the only sounds on the platform were the howling wind and the splashing water. One of the workers, named Dan, walked at the rear, followed by James, moving confidently forward. The rescuer had no doubts, they could not stop. Approaching the spot where they had seen the animal, the waves became even more threatening to the platform. Huge waters surged with such force that it seemed the platform would be swept away at any moment. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a powerful blow struck the platform, and Dan, trying to hold on, unexpectedly slipped. He plunged straight into the water, into the dark, icy waves. Everyone froze, watching as Dan disappeared under the water. Panic seemed to grip them all, but James did not hesitate. He jumped in after him and, fortunately, managed to pull him out within seconds. However, the danger only increased. Dan shivered from the cold, but there was no time to think about it. James helped him stand with great effort. The air was filled with the scent of salty water, and before their eyes flashed clouds and fog. The platform was not holding steady, it slid across the waves, and every step, every movement became increasingly dangerous. "We can't go back," James said, looking at the others. "If we don't save it, everything will have been for nothing. We have to finish this before it's too late." Mike looked into the dark waters, where the silhouette of the sea lion was barely visible. He understood that the choice had been made. There was no point in returning. Time had become their enemy. The storm did not abate. Winds tore at the platform, raising salty waves, shaking the metal beams, and making everything around tremble. Work on an oil platform was always tense, but today it was clear, the situation was on the brink of catastrophe. For men, standing in the dark, cold evening air, knew they were risking more than ever before. Their task had nothing to do with routine. They had to save an animal, a giant sea lion, covered in thick black oil, stuck in the water. From the first glance, it was clear that saving it would be extremely difficult. The oil severely restricted the animal's movements. It tried to escape the water but, due to the slippery surface of the rocks and boulders, simply could not climb up. Its dangling paws could find no support, and despite its strong movements in the water, it continued to struggle, refusing to give up. The rescuers were prepared for difficulties, but not for this. The sleeve of the rescue device slid across the wet metal surfaces, and oil and dirt clogged all the mechanisms. Everything around turned into a sticky mess, where each element slowed the process. One of the workers, Jake, felt his heart tighten when he saw the oil spreading onto the platform. Black spots began to accumulate everywhere, hindering everyone's work. Jake turned to his comrades. His gaze was full of doubt. "We have to go back," he said, almost whispering. "This is madness. The storm is getting stronger. We're risking all our lives. And for what? For this animal? We can't save it." Mark, the senior technician who always acted decisively, pressed his hand to his helmet and rushed to Jake. He was all for the mission, but Jake's doubts had caught up with him, and he felt the cold fear creeping into his heart. "We can't back down," he replied, his voice firm with resolve. "We won't leave it. We're not just saving an animal, we're saving our souls. If we retreat, it won't be a rescue, it will be a betrayal." Silently, they continued their preparations. Time was becoming increasingly limited. The storm intensified, and each wave seemed more destructive. But suddenly, a massive wave, like a tornado, engulfed them. Caught off guard, one of the workers, Thomas, slipped into the water. Everyone froze. He dangled in the cold abyss until he was firmly grabbed by the rope. The weather was so unpredictable that if he hadn't been pulled out, it would have ended in disaster. Mark looked at Tom, his heart aching. Now there was no turning back. Everyone understood that their chances of success were dwindling with each passing moment. Returning was impossible, and moving forward was becoming more dangerous with each second. They were caught between a hostile element and duty. Before they could return to their positions, another wave, even more powerful than the last, hit them. The impact jolted the platform, and once again, there was a threat. If they didn't move quickly, it would sweep them away. "We have to keep going," shouted Max, an experienced rescuer, grabbing the rope. "This is our chance." Jake took the rope with him, his fingers slippery, nervous. His heart pounded, but he knew that if they didn't act quickly, they wouldn't see the shore. Anxiety grew within him. But the fear of the unknown was nothing compared to what would happen if they gave up. Not saving one animal, that could leave an indelible stain on their conscience forever. The storm intensified with each passing moment, and it seemed as if nature itself was bursting out, turning the sea into a giant vortex. Water crashed onto the platform, tearing loud blasts of waves from its metal ribs. The gale was so ferocious that people, holding their breath, risked being caught in the very center of this nightmare. But amidst all this chaos, rescuers with bright lantern lights, under the onslaught of pain and fatigue, continued their fight for life. Approaching the sea lion, they could see its fierce resistance. Covered in thick black oil, it struggled to move in the icy water, stumbling, trying to stand. But each of its steps became heavier. The oil had severely restricted its movements, and its body could barely move. This was not just a rescue, it was a fight for every second of this animal's life, for the possibility of its salvation. Around them, the machines intended to pull the animal faltered. Oil spilled across the platform hindered the normal operation of the mechanisms, leaving the rescuers with only hope for a miracle. Each of them knew that a few more minutes could spell the end of their efforts. But they had to continue. There was no fear in their eyes, only a single gaze: rescue. Meanwhile, Jake, gritting his teeth, tried to hold the rope, attempting to secure it firmly on the metal hooks that barely withstood the tension. He wiped the sweat from his face but saw that with each passing moment, the rope became increasingly taut. The force of the wind was so great that it seemed he couldn't catch his breath. But not a single cry escaped Jake's lips. "We won't make it," Carl, one of the workers, said loudly. His voice echoed in the storm's roar, as if the whole world around them had frozen. "The oil got into the mechanism, it won't work. We're risking not only the animal's life but ours as well. We need to leave." His words echoed like thunder in a clear sky. Carl was not the only one doubting their success. Senior technician Rob's gaze was fixed on the dark waters. He saw how the storm enveloped everything and felt the heaviness of continuing. "We can't abandon it," Rob said softly, his voice barely audible in the gale. "I can't." He turned away and focused on securing the rope even tighter, feeling his exhausted body refusing to obey his will. Every muscle ached. He felt the tension growing, and with each step, the storm became even more aggressive. But what was happening inside Rob was far more complex. He couldn't allow himself to give up. Years ago, in a similar situation, he had lost a friend. He had been the senior rescuer then but couldn't save him. His friend remained in the water, never to be seen again. And now, every moment of this rescue felt like a chance to help the animal and an opportunity to redeem his past mistake. His inner world was filled with torment, and every tug toward the sea lion was a step toward freeing himself from these demons. "I will do it," he said resolutely, and everyone silently continued the struggle. With each tug on the rope, they felt they were on the brink. But they knew there was no other way. The machinery failed. One of the large engines meant to help lift the sea lion shook from the increasing water pressure. Metal gears screeched, and the control panel displayed an error. The moment of despair had arrived. Water flooded the platform even more, and the storm gained strength. Rob looked at his comrades again. He knew that if they didn't succeed, the storm would not let them out alive. The sea lion's life, his own, and his friends' lives hung in the balance. Suddenly, one of the workers, Ben, fell into the icy water. The water swallowed him almost instantly, but the sturdy rope tied around his waist held him. His eyes held everything he had experienced in those moments: fear, determination, and hope. "Hold on," Rob gritted his teeth and shouted. "We'll pull him out. We can't stop." At that moment, despite all the pain, fatigue, and fear, they continued their struggle. The sea lion, still weakened by fear, inched closer to the platform. The animal calmed down as it sensed their confidence. And with one final, powerful tug, they finally pulled it onto the platform, defying the terrible storm and all obstacles. The storm did not subside. Waves crashing from great heights pounded the platform, and the entire structure shook violently under their mighty impact. The sea lion, pulled from the water, now lay on the platform, exhausted, covered in oil. Its eyes were filled with terror, its body convulsed with fear, and it once again tried to slip back into the dark, cold water. Its powerful limbs were restrained, and each of its jerks caused the platform to slide across the water, nearly losing balance. The workers, exhausted, tired, and frozen, tried to hold the animal, preventing it from falling. Tom's strong hands gripped the rope, but it slipped, and each of his glances at the sea lion only added to the fear in his soul. He knew that each of his movements had to be precise and swift. But sea lions are not accustomed to being saved. They do not trust humans, and the horror in its eyes was not just instinct, it was desperation directed at them. "Calm down, buddy," Tom whispered, grabbing the rope and trying to hold it to prevent the sea lion from falling back into the sea. The water stung their bodies like icy needles. The platform tilted to one side, and Jake lost his balance. He barely managed to grab the cable, his body sliding across the wet surface, but there was no time for fear. His eyes met Tom's, and everyone understood that they could not retreat. Jake grabbed the rope and, despite the pain, tried to lift the animal. At that moment, as the sea lion struggled again, he felt something snap in his back. But he did not let go. With each tug, the sea lion came closer, but the terror in its eyes grew, and then it realized there was no turning back. Tom's weak but determined gaze met his partner's fearful eyes, who looked at him and asked, "Are you sure?" He nodded, answering not with words but with action. Everything now depended on this final attempt. When the last tug pulled the sea lion onto the platform, it seemed they had endured the worst. But their joy was short-lived. Jake suddenly screamed. His hand, strained from the effort and pain, had grabbed a shard when he tried to hold the rope, and he felt something in his body break. One of the rescuers rushed to him, but they had to act quickly. The platform was already sliding across the water, carrying them into the heart of the storm. Jake had only a few minutes to prepare for evacuation. All their strength went into holding the rope, keeping the sea lion steady, and saving their comrade. It was hard to move. Their bodies were covered in a layer of icy water, but they couldn't afford to relax. Tom looked at the sea lion, which now lay calmly beside him, exhausted and drained. "We did it," Tom thought, hardly believing they had finally succeeded. But the pain in his chest from his injured comrade did not leave him. Seriously damaged, the platform slid, and the storm did not relent. At that moment, as if by a miracle, the sea began to calm. In the distance, on the horizon, the last waves disappeared into the darkness. The platform, despite the damage, found itself in calmer waters, and no one could say how it happened. Everything just suddenly became quieter, as if the sea had decided to retreat. The workers, parched and with battered hands, could finally relax for a moment. However, there were casualties. Jake needed urgent medical attention, but despite this, they knew the goal was achieved. The sea lion was saved. And despite their harsh conditions, the workers felt an inner gratitude for their work and bravery. In the dark waters of the raging sea, amid the screams of the wind and the clanging of metal, the oil platform stood with exhausted but happy workers. Their bodies were wet and tired, but their eyes burned with the fire of victory, the victory that came to them after long hours of struggle with this merciless storm. They returned, not just as a team that had completed their job, but as those who had saved a life. The sea lion, its body ravaged by oil, was successfully brought to the platform and eventually sent to the shore, where rescuers and doctors awaited. The job was done, but something far more important had been born in each of them. Luke, the senior technician, stopped at the edge of the platform and looked out to sea. In his tired and slightly clouded eyes, one could read joy and relief, but not only. He knew that this rescue had become a personal redemption for him. Once, many years ago, he had failed to save his friend, and now, years later, this operation had become a chance to correct his mistake. His entire life, all this struggle with himself, had led him here. Rob, one of the young workers, holding his hand on the railing, remembered how he had doubted at the beginning, not knowing whether it was worth risking their lives for someone else's. Now, however, he was filled with gratitude. Gratitude not only for the success but also for being part of something meaningful, something greater than just a job. Suddenly, James, who was slightly ahead, turned to them with a slight smile. He was soaked, his face scratched and worn, but there was something indescribable in his gaze. He had seen the sea lion in its final moments of rescue, when the animal finally calmed down and stopped struggling. He felt an incredible peace in his heart. This was not just a rescue, it was something more. "We did it," James said, his voice firm despite the fatigue. There was no need to say more. Each of them understood that they had accomplished something important. A new day dawned, and as they stood on the platform, the sea was significantly calmer. It no longer roared or raged like yesterday. Now, looking at the horizon, they realized that the storm had subsided not only outside but also in their souls. The sea lion, saved from death, was now far away. But they remained, changing each other's lives and themselves. Mike, the senior rescuer, stood nearby and, looking at the horizon, quietly said, "You know, friends, sometimes we have to go through real storms to understand that we are capable of more than we think. Yesterday we saved a life, but today we have become different people. And that is far more important." And as they all looked together at the calm sea, each of them seemed to find within themselves a new sense of unity that changed everything. No matter how many challenges lay ahead, they were ready to face them, knowing that together they could overcome any storm.